without further ado, I want to introduce you to Amy E. Smith. Good morning, girlfriend.
Good morning.
How
I'm so
are you?
excited to be here. Hearing you read that, I'm like, oh, I sound pretty awesome.
You sound like a badass, and you are. I am so
Likewise.
excited that you are closing the year out with me with the Leadership in Heels event today. It is fitting for all that we have been through this year. You know, one of the things that I failed to mention to you in the audience is that in spite of the fact that we can't see you, we feel your presence and we want you to have an interactive experience with us this morning. So send your questions in the Q&A or comments in the chat because we want to hear from you. It is our goal this morning to really meet you where you are and help you navigate through how to leave the past behind you and create the leadership journey that you truly, truly desire. And what better person to do that with than Amy. So what do you think? You ready to get this party started?
I am so ready. I am so ready.
Well, we were talking about the fact that 2020, I don't care who you are and where you are, it has been a difficult year for all of us. Whether we have finally been able to navigate through or we're still trying to figure it out. I know that each of us started this year with some expectations about what our year would look like, right? Can we quickly figured out that we have zero control of expectations because
Right.
before we knew it, coronavirus, COVID-19 has shocked the world and we were sheltering in place.
That's
Then
right.
you double down with the fact that we end up really becoming acutely aware of the social injustice.
Yes.
And Black Lives Matter became, again, a worldwide focus. And we were forced to sit with ourselves to actually navigate through, am I a racist or am I an anti-racist?
Right.
Then you come up with this entire political divide. I don't care what side of the table you sit on, Republican or Democrat. It has created division in our nation between people. And so we've had to navigate through that. And now we're working from home, sheltering in place, and people are experiencing loss. So, how do you begin to even navigate leaving
Yeah.
all of that behind and creating a journey as we prepare for 2021? That's what Amy and I are really going to try and work through this morning and chat with you about and leave you some tips. So, Amy, why don't we start with the people that you are coaching and training and developing?
Mhm.
What are people really dealing with in 2020? And how are we even addressing how we feel
Right.
around what we've been through, getting in touch with ourselves so that we can start to take some steps to actually leave the past behind? Can you tell us a little bit about what you're seeing?
Yeah, there has been a very prevailing theme in the women that I work with. And so sort of what I do in my little corner of the world is I work kind of twofold in the internal component of how we relate to ourselves, how we feel about our own self-confidence, our own self-worth, and then the external component of how do I then communicate that with the world? So what does it look like to establish boundaries, have tough conversations, say no to things without being racked with guilt? So I'm constantly bouncing back and forth with people in their relationship with themselves and then
Mhm.
also their relationship with the outside world. And I think perhaps one of the most prevailing themes that I have seen over the course of 2020 has been the acknowledgement of collective trauma. And I think we, in our society, we group trauma or we ascribe trauma to something severely egregious like death or assault or things like that. But there is also a consistent trauma that's happening with how we experience fear
Mhm.
constantly,
Right.
right? And one of the other elements of that is current trauma kicks up old trauma. So I'm sure you have seen as we go through all of the injustices that we saw with the death of George Floyd in May, if you had ever suffered a racial injustice, that got kicked up tenfold. So not only were you dealing with the immediate trauma, but you were dealing with all of the trauma that you had experienced your entirety of your life, because you remember it.
That's a great point, because I had a horrible experience on Friday. Friday, now, first of all, I have three sons, three Black
Yes.
sons,
Yes.
who have experienced racial injustice. And although I've been afraid based on what I've heard and what I've seen, and with everything just turned up this year, I literally experienced it. So Friday, I go to get a facial, and I decide to go across the street to the ATM. Now, I'm looking like a boy. I have no makeup on. I just got a facial. I have my son's huge hoodie on. I'm driving a $100,000 car. My hair is short, and I look like a boy. And I pulled out of the driveway, and an officer was facing me. We were nose to nose. Now, I'm turning right to go back into my facial place. There's nothing else there but my facial and houses. And he would ordinarily, I would assume, be going his right to go back into traffic. When I made that, he looked me eye to eye. And in that moment, Amy, I knew I was going to be pulled over by the police. I knew it. And I made the right. He pulled right behind me. I went to go into the facial place. He turned on his lights. He pulled me over. Bottom line is, in that very moment, to your point, every bit of trauma I experienced rose up in my soul.
Yes.
I was petrified. And to top it off, he came around on the passenger side, tapped my window with a pistol.
Wow.
With a pistol. Now, what I feel made the difference for me is, by the time he looked in, my purse was sitting in the passenger seat. And in that moment, when I turned and looked at him, he knew he was dealing with a woman. And it was so interesting, everything that rose up in me, the fear of things that I had been through in my past, the fear that I experienced for my children, the fear that I went through when my son was being racially discriminated against in school and forced to stand on that stone with that noose around his neck when he was in the 8th grade, the fear of what my child had told me about when he was told that he was too Black to stand against the wall to take all of the things. And then you're watching it on television and it's extremely magnetized. And in that moment, I was petrified. And yet resilience had to rise up, because I literally got into a conversation with this police officer. And when he noticed who I was, and we don't have enough time to go through the whole story, but the bottom line is, I ended up sharing with him that at the end of the day, you're the one that's going to have to sit with yourself and figure out why you made a decision when you looked into my face.
Yes.
That you wanted to pull me over.
That's
now,
right.
The long and short of it is, he ended up giving me my license and telling me to have a nice evening. But it was a very, very, very difficult time. And to your point, when any level of trauma comes your way, it literally does rise up and magnetize the trauma that you've experienced. And so now you look at what we've experienced in 2020, sheltering in place, the racial divide, the political injustice, sheltering in place, Black Lives Matter. I was petrified.
Sure.
And yet I still had to navigate through to get to my end game. And do that in the midst of that pain, in the midst of that fear, it is difficult.
And I think something that you're pointing to here is it is so easy for us to override what we're experiencing, right? And to go, okay, no harm, no foul, no one was killed, I'm okay. But what we don't realize is the dramatic effect that is taking on our lives, on our energy. One of the things I've been hearing from a lot of people is, I have zero motivation. Like, I have all this time, or I have this ability to start my side hustle, or to finally revamp my garage, or do whatever. And I have zero motivation. Well, guess what? Grief shows up as melancholy, lethargy, not having desire and motivation. So when I say new trauma kicks up old trauma, think about what we're experiencing right now, even with shelter in place. If you've ever had fear of the unknown, loss of control in your life, concerns about your financial well-being, if you've ever experienced those things, let's say in childhood or in a past marriage, it sure as hell is going to get kicked up now when we're experiencing this new thing. And then at the same time, we're trying to forge forward like it's business as usual, because for many of us, it hasn't been a sharp, acute trauma the way like a car accident is, let's say, where it's like, okay, I had the trauma moment and now I can start recovering and rebuilding. We don't have that because we're still in that consistent trauma. So one of the things that I advocate for all the time is to give yourself such an extreme amount of grace that we are carrying on an energetic level a burden and a monolith that we've never experienced before. And we're just walking around trying to pretend like, well, why can't I be more motivated? And why don't I want? And it's like, well, because we're in the middle of trauma.
And you know, the thing about it is it's the awareness that you're talking about. And when you start to think about what are the key things is, first of all, you have to be aware of what you feel. And in that moment, when I experienced that on Friday, I had to allow myself a level of consciousness to say, all right, look, Scharrell, you are afraid. You are in a panic. Your body is now experiencing PTSD. I suffer from PTSD. I was brutally raped early in my early life, and I went through some traumatic times. So that will kick up in me.
Sure.
But the key is, where is the hope? And so what happens is, in that moment, you can't stay stuck based on what you feel, right?
That's right.
You got to acknowledge what you feel, but then you got to decide, what is my end game? And I think we want to really speak to how you move from that state of being where you are afraid, discouraged, frustrated, to igniting that hope within you, and then deciding, right, that you're going to do something different. I was afraid, but I decided when I looked that police officer in the eye that there is absolutely no way that you are going to walk away from here believing that your behavior is acceptable. It's just absolutely no way. Yeah. And he kept telling me, well, ma'am, you need to calm down. I said, let me explain something to you. What you don't have a right to do is tell me how I feel.
That's right.
Because there's absolutely no way I'm going to calm down when you made a decision to pull me over simply because you looked me in my eye. And then he asked me, well, why do you think I pulled you over? I said, because you saw a black face and you thought I was a boy and decided that I didn't deserve to be driving in this $100,000 car. That's why I think you pulled me over.
Yep.
You know, and as we navigated through that, the bottom line is, you've got to decide that at the end of the day, regardless of how I feel, I'm going to move toward what my end game is.
Yes.
And so I think that even though we're sitting in this space of anxiety and worry or fear, we've got to make sure that we maintain that hope.
That's right.
And start to move forward. But how do you do that, Amy? How does a person then decide that in spite of how I feel, I'm going to shift? How do you do that?
Well, I think there are multiple things to take into consideration. One is, I find it incredibly detrimental to ever ignore how you feel. I feel like one of the most important pieces of this is emotional intelligence, which we're not taught, right? We're told to sweep it under the rug. We're told to not rock the boat. We have all of these idioms that say, keep your mouth shut and keep just going on to get on. And one of the key pieces, I think, is us acknowledging that this stuff hurts, that there's a reason why we are frustrated, why this year has been painful. We are unearthing things, especially, the white community is unearthing shit that they have never looked at because the system is set up for them to not have to look at it.
Right.
And so I think that there's, first of all, you have to start acknowledging the pain that you're feeling, because I do think that there is a problem that happens sometimes in personal development where we go, just think positive, just focus on the good stuff. And that's great, but not if you are suffering. So what that looks like is addressing the pain that you're in. So I do have a tool that I would love to share that very much to your point around acknowledging how you feel. It's a very simple acronym. It's NAC.
Mhm.
And the N stands for notice and name. So you notice and name the emotion that's coming up. So you
Mhm.
identify, oh my gosh, I'm feeling guilty. I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm feeling fear. I'm feeling stressed. I'm feeling anxiety. You notice and name the emotion first. Then you move to the A, which is ask. What is behind this emotion? What is fueling this emotion?
Mhm.
Okay, and to your point, I'm actually in legitimate danger, right? But we also experience fear when we're not actually in illegitimate danger, when just we're afraid of what somebody's going to think of us. We're afraid if we don't, we're not going to get the promotion. We're afraid if our in-laws don't like the decisions that we've made. So, right?
I know we've
So,
talked about you going through that, so we're gonna bring that up, but you
um,
navigated through that real good. So.
well, I have more issues with my own mom, like trust, but I'm married up, I think. But so you start asking what's behind that, right? So what is fueling this reason why I feel guilt or overwhelmed? And then the final C, which is kind of what you were talking about, is choose.
Right.
Is choose. And you're going to choose two things. You're going to choose how you speak to yourself, and you're going to choose your behavior.
Right.
So, because so often we're fueled by our emotions and we start making choices that are not based in a sense of empowerment, because emotions are hyperbolic, they're dramatic as hell. Like,
Exactly.
so they will tell you a big story, right? So if you're feeling insecure, it means now that you're not enough or you're
Right.
never going to succeed, when really that's just a dramatic story that's being told by your emotions. So if we can start heightening this emotional intelligence, notice and name them, ask what's behind them, and start choosing our self-talk and our behavior, we can
Mhm.
start moving beyond what this turmoil is that really essentially has us feeling stuck.
No, that's perfect because once you understand what is being said about NAC, then it will become natural in you. Because,
Yes.
and I appreciate you articulating even the steps that I needed to take on Friday, right? Because at the end
Yep.
of the day, on Friday, it was like, oh my gosh, I'm scared. Well, why am I scared? Well, I'm scared because, and be able to really navigate that. But then saying, okay, but am I in harm? Am I not in harm? Well, in that moment, I really wasn't sure. But
Yes.
what is it that I want to do?
Yes.
And being able to really navigate through that process so that you don't allow yourself to move according to how you feel, but really what you want. Whether you can control the outcome or not is perfect. And I hope that everybody watching and listening got that.
Yeah.
NAC, name and notice the emotion, ask what's behind it. What am I feeling? Is this real? Is it
Yep.
fake? Is it something that's based on my feelings only? And then choose how you want to speak to yourself and what you want to do. That's perfect. Grab that takeaway. It's yours, it's free, and use it because it's critical. But one of the things you said about making those choices is well, let me back up and say one thing. One of the comments that you made about our feelings and the fact that sometimes we deny ourselves an ability to feel what we feel. And you taught me a lot about that. I always use fear can have a voice, but not a vote. And I got that from you. And the fact that you can allow yourself to feel what you want to feel, but it should not impact what you do and the
Right.
choices that you make. Keep your choices aligned with what you want to accomplish. But what would you say to individuals who have a hard time with dealing with their emotions because of the expectations of others? In other words, I'm a strong woman. I've been going through some difficult times. I recently just went through a breakup with my fiance. I'm dealing with this whole 2020 sheltering in place thing. I'm having some challenges with some things at work, love my job, outstanding boss. But there are challenges when you come in as the change agent and people want to
That's right.
hold tight to what they're used to. And,
Yes.
and so you're feeling these things, but you're supposed to be the rock, right? You're the one everybody leans in on. How dare you start to feel down or depressed or not be able to give? And so
Yep.
you almost feel guilty about the fact that you're not okay. What would
That's
you
right.
say to individuals who find themselves in that space and
Yeah.
how they should deal with their emotions based on even denying themselves the ability to walk through what they're feeling because of the expectations of others. Now,
Yes.
that's a lot, but I know you got it.
I do. And well, there's a handful of things. One thing I do want to say is that is a quote that is from Elizabeth Gilbert. So it's not
Yes,
my quote.
I know.
It's from her book, Big Magic. So I don't ever want to take somebody else's work. But as far as this idea of embracing our emotions, I start with a new belief around what it means to feel. So I would love to give everybody a new way of looking at it, because a lot of our society says, if you are vulnerable, if you show emotion, that then equals weakness. That means you don't have strength. But I would argue that in a world that tells you you have to be this way, you have to be stoic and strong, to show who you are, to actually be vulnerable, to emote, is the fiercest act of bravery and courage that you could possibly have. So when I get teary, when I get emotional, when I get sad, I'm like, lucky for you, you get to see my superpower. Because if you think about, if we watch any sort of documentary where someone's being interviewed and they start tearing up a little bit, what is the first thing that they say? They say, I'm sorry. They say, I'm sorry. I don't want you to see my humanity. I'm sorry you have to be with me being human. And then what does the other person say? Don't cry. Don't cry. I can't be with that. So I think as a leader, one of the fiercest act of bravery and courage is to be emotional.
Now, Amy, the internet was
everybody else can put up walls.
The internet was going out, so I want you to repeat that. You think, say that again.
I think it's the fiercest act of bravery and courage to actually be emotional when everyone else and their mother can put walls up. Everyone else can hold somebody at arm's length.
Right.
But what does that look like? How do we start with that? And that really is a challenge. One of the things that I do suggest for people, especially because we are dealing with a collective grief and everybody has varying levels of grief that they're experiencing, is to do what I like to call controlled emoting. Because it's not that like everybody is going to be able to just bawl their eyes out in front of somebody or to express extreme amount of gratitude, because that feels so vulnerable. Being with emotions is a learned skill because it has been bred out of us for so many people. So if you can start by, again, go through the knack tool, notice, ask, choose. If you're noticing an emotion of sadness, one of my favorite things to do is to lock yourself in a room where nobody's going to bother you. No one's going to see you. Put on some YouTube video. For me, it's always when Ellen gives like soldiers or like, people from Iraq, she gives them all this money or sets in underprivileged people up with amazing things, and just bawl your eyes out.
That's right.
Bawl your eyes out. If you're noticing anger, frustration, rage, like some of the stuff that you've talked about, go home and get yourself throw a temper tantrum, beat the shit out of your bed, do a primal scream, scribble, find things that you can break. Your emotions are valid. You're always still responsible for your behavior. Doesn't mean you can go key somebody's car, but you sure as hell can rip up old clothes or scribble furiously, or I got myself a punching bag. Truth be told, with this administration, I was like, I'm going to need a punching bag. So, this last past one, thank God things are looking different now. But I was like, okay, that's how I handled the last 4 years, was with a punching bag.
It's great that you say that. And I appreciate that because, my mentee and I were talking about her emotions and some of the things that she was going through and experiencing. And I think that oftentimes she looks to me, because I'm like mom number two, as if I don't go through those same things. And I was telling her, it was interesting because last week I made a decision that I was really going to sit with myself throughout these last 2 weeks and up until the holiday, and then resit with myself up until Christmas, and then resit with myself until my 55th birthday, because I made a conscious decision that there are things about my life I want to change. And when I
Yes,
made that decision, that means that you're going to mourn the loss of the things that you have to give up. And
that's
so
right.
as a result of that, I really found myself in a state where I was feeling depressed. Now,
Yes,
I'm a motivator, I'm a speaker, I'm a coach. I don't
right.
even have a right to feel depressed, or that's a lie that I told myself. But
Yep.
I stood in here, and anybody who knows me knows that now I give myself about 3 minutes, and I cried out. Now I'm big on gospel, so I was playing my Yes reprise, and I was in here, and I was like, all right, Lord, I
Yes.
know I'm gonna get through this. But in this moment, I'm mad, I'm sad, I'm hurt, I'm disappointed, I trusted, I was betrayed. I went
Yes.
through all of my emotions, and I cried out. And I was
Yes.
listening to her tell me how she thought, she really couldn't confess to me that she was feeling what she was feeling. And I was thinking, girlfriend, if you only knew, I feel it too, But the thing is to not stay stuck in it. So I
That's right.
gave myself the opportunity to feel what I feel, but then to move beyond my feelings and then
That's right.
decide. I'd love to move toward how do you make the decision? Because so many people have a difficult time leaving the past behind them and carrying it along with them because they don't know how to decide for something better for themselves.
Yeah.
So, can we speak to how do you actually make that decision? How do you decide that I am going to do something different? And what are some of the steps that you need to take in order to do that? Can you speak to that for me, Amy?
Sure. Well, if you think about anything else that you've ever manifested in your life, whether it's you decided to go to school, or you decided to get a master's degree, or you decided on a specific house you wanted to buy, or you decided on a marriage, it started with a declaration. It was a definitive moment in time where you said, I'm going to do this thing. This thing will be mine. And it is not dissimilar to anything else that's interpersonal. The problem is that it's not tangible, right? Like we can see the college degree, we can see the house, the car, the husband, the wife, whatever. But it's a little bit difficult for us to grab onto something that isn't as tangible. But it's a fierce decision. Just like you said, it's just a deciding factor. Now,
Right.
I think that when you get it out of your actual body by either speaking it to somebody else that you trust or writing it down, it's getting out of your physical vessel. You have now sent a message energetically that this is something that you intend to work on. Now, that could be something you want to attain, but that could also be something personal development related, as
Right.
in, I choose to let this go. I choose not to suffer over this any longer, whatever it is, might fill in the blank. But I do think that there's power in witness. And I feel very strongly about speaking your truth into ears that can hear you, because
Exactly.
not all ears can hear you. Trust that. But if you find those allies, that soul tribe, those people who can genuinely hear your intention of what you want to change going forward, that's the first step. That's the
Right.
very first step. But you are not done. You are not done. It's like saying, I'm going to make 6 figures this year, or I'm going to buy this car. You don't stop there. You then have to nurture that decision. You have to
Right.
nurture that new stance. And then comes all of the action, then comes the game plan, et cetera. And we can talk about that too, if you'd like.
No, I think that's great what you're saying. And I think that it's important that you do make that decision and that you do speak it out into existence. I think oftentimes when we find ourselves in a space that's less than desirable, many of us isolate.
Yep.
And then what we're doing is we're doing this self-talk that's not really yielding us any positive gain. And so it
Yes.
is important that you make sure that you have some safe people around you, that you not only speak life into your own situation, but you speak that into those who will hold you accountable. I mean, we
That's
got
right.
to check our tribe. And
That's
it's
right.
critical that you have a tribe around you that's going to usher you through to the finish line. Somebody who really cares about you enough to not talk to you about what you didn't do, but really support you in what you're trying to do. But I also think that we've got to be mindful of what we say, because
Yes.
so often we believe nobody cares, nobody understands, nobody wants to see me win. When really that's just a lie.
That's right.
There are people who care. You are not alone, and people will usher you through. But sometimes we've got to allow ourselves to reach our hand across the aisle so that somebody can grab it and walk us through. I know I used to struggle with that.
For
As
sure.
an independent person, I didn't really know how to ask for help. So
That's
how do
right.
you navigate through that when you're feeling like all you have is yourself? What do you
Well,
do?
I think you're spot on here that semantics matter, words matter. So one thing that I would say around self-talk is stop identifying as things that you don't want to exist. So stop saying, I'm such a people pleaser, I'm such a perfectionist, or I can't be vulnerable. Stop identifying and saying stuff about yourself that you don't want to be true, because you speak that into existence. Once you identify that way, you start gathering evidence to support that. So, for example, if you're saying nobody loves me or nobody supports me, you better believe you're going to notice every single example of somebody not supporting you, and you're going to miss the litany of other times that people are waiting in the wings to be there for you. So this is also sort of a concept in neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP, and I like to call them absolutes. When we say things like always, never, no one, everyone, where we're making this broad absolute statement that is a fallacy. It's a way in which our inner critic is telling us a bold-faced lie. So if you can start shifting and saying, we don't necessarily have to say something like, everyone loves me or everyone supports me or whatever it might be, but we can start using what I like to call progressive language. I am open to finding people who support me, or I'm on the way to cultivating my tribe, where we're starting to say, maybe I'm not there yet, but I'm exploring what it looks like, something that's progressive. I'm on my way to figuring out what self-trust looks like. I'm exploring what it looks like to feel my emotions, using that progressive language instead of making this absolute statement of no one, always, everyone, never, which is a fallacy.
And I think you also have to, and I would say, when you're looking for a tangible tip, you got to start your day off speaking life into your own situation. I mean, so often people will say, well, what's your morning routine? And I just decide every day that I'm have a good day. My
Yes.
day is not dictated by what I go through or what happens. It's dictated by my own perspective. And so I would encourage everybody out there to really consider how you start your day. Do you start your day looking at your phone, or jumping and checking your calendar, or getting right into your routine of making coffee or trying to navigate for the kids, versus really taking time to start your day sitting with yourself and deciding what you want to experience each day? And the other thing that you just said around starting to move and progress toward the possibility, I think there are some things that you can be adamant about. I mean, when I wake up in the morning and everybody hears me say it, I look in the morning and say, good morning, badass, as I look in the mirror.
Yes.
I mean, at the end of the day, I am what I believe about myself. And even if there's a gap in me becoming the baddest ass versus where I am today, I'm navigating and telling myself that that is who I am. And I also would encourage you to stop letting people say negative things to you. I was sharing with someone, and we were talking about an experience. And I said to the individual, I said, the bottom line is I'm great at that. And it's almost as if people be like, well, I just can't believe you said you're great at that. That sounds a little bit cocky. Well, I said I'm great at it because I am.
That's
and
right.
we literally will dilute ourselves to become more mediocre in order to be more accepted, versus really accepting who we are and speaking that to others. How do we shift to really owning our greatness and being unafraid to tell our great story? What would you say, Amy, about that?
Well, there's a couple things to the point that you just made. One is one of my favorite anti-patriarchy questions that I ask myself is, would a man have a problem saying this? Would a man have a problem would an old ass white man have a problem saying, I am really good at this? Probably not. Right? So that's
Not
one of my little internal checks that I kind of go, no, you're allowed to own this. Now, I recently, I'm not sure if I told you this, but I took a social justice program, and we learned about systems of oppression. And no matter what kind of marginalized community you're in, whether you are a person of color, not able-bodied, whether you are, a woman, whatever it is, the systems of oppression thrive on us believing that we are not enough.
Right.
As whoever we are. So one of the fiercest acts of revolution and rebellion that we can take is to start claiming our enoughness. Now, in other pieces of that is claiming our worth, resting, right? When the society says you don't matter, you're not enough, you don't deserve rest, you don't deserve play, you don't deserve recreation, you don't deserve community. Those are the things that we can very fiercely take a stand in and say, no, I matter so much that I deserve to not be productive for one damn day. I can take a weekend off. The antithesis of that is our capitalist society. Our capitalist society says you are valuable if you are producing. You need to produce. So God forbid we rest or we play or we stay in community and not make money, and there's even this whole idea around self-care of you need to take care of yourself so that you can then be productive. How about let's just take care of ourselves so that we're taking care of ourselves.
Right.
So I really think that there's this internal piece that has to be done. A lot of times we think, as long as all of these external things start to work out, as long as my candidate wins, as long as we start seeing a shift in our workplace, as long as my partner starts to see it my way, then I can be happy. But all of those things are external factors that have nothing to do with your own internal self-worth.
Exactly.
So you have got to start doing that work. And that's definitely not something we can size up in a short amount of time. But to your point, you can start with very small morning practices. What I do every single morning, because fun little hypnosis fact, we're all in a state of hypnosis right as we come out of our sleep and right as we go to sleep. So right as I'm waking up, I immediately start going into my gratitudes and I start saying all of the things that I'm thankful for, and minimal things like I'm so thankful for my gel pens. Like I love my gel pens, all of the different things that we have to be grateful for to start your day off in a different way. And I do the same thing too, where I catch myself in the mirror and I'm like, girl, so cute. Or
exactly.
like,
hey, if you don't tell yourself, nobody else will. And I think it's important that you have to have a morning routine with yourself to get yourself where you want to be, because there will be disruption. And
that's right.
Getting up, saying the gratitude, speaking to yourself. I pray with my prayer partner. I start my day with my gospel music. I read. It's just, those are things, they're non-compromisable. And I think, one of the things I wanted to speak to is, as we're learning how to leave our past behind and really lead ourselves into a journey that's aligned with our end game, we got to set some boundaries.
Yes.
Right? Even the boundary around the rest, as you said, the boundary around using the word no and not overtaxing yourself, the boundary around getting enough sleep or having some self-talk. But when people are, you use the word people pleasers, because many of us feel like we're people pleasers. How do you shift from being a people pleaser to a person who can set boundaries and exercise that word no? Do you have any tools that you can give us? Or
girl, I can
struggle with that?
I do a program that's like 4 months long that's all about this. Okay, so the first thing to understand about people pleasing is that we're actually wired for that. So if we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, one of our primary human needs is the sense of belonging. And that stems from our primitive ancestors. If they did not belong to a group, that meant you died, right? It was impending death. So now flash forward to, our evolved consciousness now, we still have lingering effects of that. So what that looks like is, if my in-laws don't approve of me, if I get passed over for this promotion, I might die. Like that's what's happening on a subconscious level. We don't consciously think that, but subconsciously we're like, better make everybody love me. Oh my God, everybody needs to approve of me so that I can survive. So the first thing I think is understanding you've done that behavior to stay safe. You're not doing that for the hell of it. You're doing that to take care of yourself. But now we have some new information. Now we know there's better ways to caretake for ourselves.
Right.
So my first suggestion is to start with an inventory and start looking at with whom do I chronically complain about the things that they are doing? Who is that person? Because let me tell you what, if you're pissed at your boss, your partner is probably getting an earful. If you can't stand something your mom did, then it's probably your sister who's getting an earful. And if it's worth chronically complaining about, then it's probably worth taking action on. Those are usually the places where you need to start speaking up, where you need to start having a boundary. Now, we could go on and on about that one, but that's just sort of the rudimentary start there. Now, I'm not talking about just venting out a tough day.
Right.
Like that's a different situation. I'm talking about you are chronically and consistently upset with somebody's behavior and you're telling everybody else except them.
Right.
And then there's a very, nuanced, finessed way to actually deliver that and to communicate that in a powerful way. But that's where you need to start, because most of the time we don't even know. We just go, I let myself get walked all over, or I never speak up. So first of all, stop identifying that way. Start saying, I'm learning how to speak up for myself. I'm ushering in advocating for who I am. Stop identifying that way. And then start taking this inventory and looking at, what do I consistently complain about and I'm not vocal about? That's where your boundaries need to happen.
Right. And I think I would also say that when you do speak to that person and you've made them aware of what is not working for you, you then need to decide. Because so often we get into the habit of complaining even to the person about what's working and what's not working, more importantly, what's not. And yet we continue to accept that behavior. We've got to remember that we teach people how to treat us.
Yes.
And so complaining about what's not working and yet not making a decision to no longer tolerate it are two different things. And that's where the boundary comes in. We've got to be clear about what we want, but more importantly, we've got to be clear about what we don't want. Right. I sent a message to my best friend, and I was talking to her about how so often we see something in someone that are things and characteristics that we like, and then we believe that that person is that. But what we fail to do is see what they are not. And then we end up making bad choices. And so it's very, very important that we are clear with people about what we want and what we don't want. And then we are prepared to make a decision if they're not able to meet our expectation.
That's right.
Because to say that I don't want to be with a smoker, but then decide I'm going to be with a smoker, just said that my word really doesn't mean anything.
That's right.
It's very important that we understand what it is that we want. Otherwise, we create this life of habits that we don't even actually like. And that becomes who we are. And I think so many people, Amy, are struggling in that space of complaint. They're struggling in the space of, well, I don't even know why this person treats me this way. Well, because you let them.
Because you tolerate it.
Right.
Because you tolerate it.
You failed to say no. You failed to set that boundary. And again, I want to open up to the audience that if you have any questions, specific questions you want Amy and I to answer, please submit them in the Q&A because we'd be happy to answer that. But, I want to take a shift and move to sheltering in place specifically, because we know that has had a significant impact on us when it comes to anxiety, stress. Many people are working from home. They're raising children at the same time, relationship. They're feeling isolated. They're individuals who are literally home alone and they're single. They love to be in something or a relationship or have an opportunity to meet people, but aren't feeling as comfortable getting out and navigating and socializing. So, that's impacted us emotionally. and
Yes.
how we've been able to interact with one another, and then how you balance home and kids and work, and they're in school virtually. Let's shift to that and have some conversation around how do we navigate, especially with the way the numbers are going, creating a better tomorrow, really leaving the past behind. Sometime when you leave the past behind, that doesn't mean that the situation may change, but maybe you have to change. So,
Yeah.
how do you navigate through leaving the past behind in this situation where we're all sheltering in place and still experiencing life the way you want to? Can we talk about that a
Yeah.
little bit, Amy?
Sure. And, I think what we were talking about earlier, we've all had to kind of grieve the loss of a lot of freedoms with this, so I think now we've gotten to this point where we're like, oh, okay, is this going to be the new normal? I hope not. But we are seeing massive rises in anxiety and depression. Suicide rates are higher, and it's not surprising because we are built for community. We are built for communing with one another. So I think that this is not dissimilar to anything else that we need to be intentional about.
Right.
And especially if one of your coping behaviors is isolation,
Mhm.
especially if you are already introverted. There are, and that's me, actually, surprisingly enough. I always say I'm an outgoing introvert, but I have to really watch it because I do tend to isolate. And so I have to make it a point to commune with people. Now, that's just going to look very different. Now, obviously, we can have Zoom get-togethers, but even I have a friend who lives close, and we've been talking about getting together and walking together, but walking on the opposite sides of the street and just talking to each other through, our devices, right? So that we can talk to one another, but we're still distanced. Being able to have like tailgate parties somewhere where you're just hanging out in your own car. Like, there's still ways to connect with each other.
Right.
We just have to be creative about it.
Mhm.
And I find that one of the most difficult parts of that is, like I was saying earlier, grief shows up as malaise and lethargy. And so we just get where we're like, I don't want to do anything. So we have to get ourselves up, make some plans, figure out how you are motivated, figure out what does get you into action, and set some stuff in place. I know for me, if I'm just like, oh, I'm going to get outside today, I don't do that as well as if I have it on my calendar,
Right.
or I have an appointment that I have to make. I have to put in some sort of accountability, but
Mhm.
also communing with nature. That is one of the most
Right.
healing elements. Get your feet in the
Right.
sand, or where I'm at, it's just these gorgeous forests. Get connected with music, right? Like, there's all these other sensory elements that we can start tapping into besides just scrolling and nonstop media.
Right.
We're also dealing with a 24-hour news cycle that we did not used to have, and that wreaks havoc on our emotional well-being. So
Right.
consider a media detox. Consider
Exactly.
a sabbatical from social media. Limit how much news you're consuming. There's a ton of stuff around that. You just have to get a little bit more creative and getting into action and acknowledging how you operate the best.
Right. No, I think that those are all good things because it is important that we recognize that community is necessary, and it's very easy for us to isolate ourselves regardless of what our personality type is. But I think that it is important to find the things that really bring the best out in you, like you're
Yeah.
saying, and connecting in a very positive way,
Mhm.
watching the conversations that we're having with those that are negative versus those that are positive, and really shifting from giving some space to individuals that are just takers, right? And really making
Yes.
sure that you have a balance of relationship where people are actually pouring into you, even if they're just bringing laughter to your spirit. They may not be able to
Yes.
solve a problem or that person that you have to really navigate through a situation with, but they may be that person that you can talk to, that when you hang up the phone, and this is my dad, you know that your cheeks are going to be hurting because you've just been laughing all day. Or
Yes.
really watching an old movie that's a comedy, or finding music. I'm a music connoisseur. So I
Yes.
literally, I mean, I think in my other life, I was supposed to be some sort of a dancer. I don't know which type, but I think I was supposed to be. But when I tell you, I get my dance on in my house, in my room, turning on some
Yes.
music, And then being intentional about scheduling that community time with the people that you love. I think, people, it's important that people are very, very intentional about experiencing life the way that you want to.
Mhm.
And so being able to actually schedule time to meet with your friends and have, the martini on Zoom, or
Yeah.
we did a little flower arranging thing with my mom and my daughter-in-law and her mom for
Fun.
Mother's Day, or, having a champagne toast. I'm getting ready to do that with some friends. But at the end of the day, what your point is around community mattering, it is important that we stay connected.
That's right.
And the other thing that I'll speak to is that we have to speak on what we want as opposed to always complaining about what we don't have.
That's right.
The idea of waiting for things to go back to the way that it used to be, it's over. So we just
That's
need
right.
to shut that thought down.
That's right.
And, as we talked about in our previous session, create your new normal. I
Mhm.
think in creating your new normal, that's part of leaving the past behind.
That's right.
Sometimes we have a hard time accepting the newness of our
Yeah.
life as much as we want it, and mourning the
Sure.
loss of things that don't go along with the new life. So I really also think that it's important that we do that. I saw that there was a question in the Q&A, so I'm going to take a second. And it says, how can we set our boundaries when it feels impossible to recognize what we need our boundaries to be? Wanting to be great as a professional, mother, wife, friend, but feeling the need to be all of those roles all the time at our fullest potential. Wow, that's a good one. So how
Yeah.
can we set our boundaries when it feels impossible to recognize what we need our boundaries to be?
Yeah. Well, it sounds like the first thing is to recognize some clarity. And I think that it was Oprah who said, you can have all of the things, you just can't have them all at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, to your point, you've raised 3 incredible sons. There's a different season for what it's like to have young children versus what it's like to be a career professional. It's much easier when you can equally disperse time and energy into all of these different roles, but that doesn't happen in every season of your life. So I think that it's really important, first of all, to gain that clarity around what are my biggest priorities, and is there a hierarchy? So
Right.
for many of us, if I were to say, what are the most important things in your life, most of the time people say my partner, my family, maybe my spirituality. But then we look at where they spend their most time and energy, and it's taking care of everybody else.
Right.
It's volunteering for things that don't matter as much to you, or it's work, it's nonstop work. So I think if you can start identifying and recognizing that these things are going to change in the different seasons of your life, but
Right.
right now, what's the hierarchy? What is the most important thing for me to focus on? And that will change. So if you have young children, for example, that might be right up there with career,
Right.
if you are going through something like caretaking for an ailing parent, that might be superseding your career at the moment. Or if you're going through a separation or a divorce or something like that, getting through that season might be more important
Right.
than running a marathon. I mean, who knows? But you have to start looking at what the priorities are for your life in this particular season. But it starts with clarity, because if you don't have a map, you're never going to get to the destination.
Exactly, exactly. And you're absolutely correct. I think when you think about setting boundaries, to your point, you identify, you take the time to write down, as you said, what are the things that are important to me. And then you make sure that you reevaluate that on a consistent basis.
That's right.
I started when I made some major decisions recently, I
Yeah.
decided to go back to journaling. And in my journaling, I started to really write down specifically what are the things that are important to me. And one of the things that I realized is that I have spent my entire life focusing on others.
Yes.
I do now, but I recognize that I didn't even really pray for myself other than praying that God could use me to help others.
Right.
In other words, I was really never asking for what I wanted for myself.
Right.
And I recognized that I needed to learn how to consider Scharrell.
Yes.
Consider the fact that it's not just that I'm living this purpose-driven life of leadership to make a difference in the lives of others, but I need to also look out for Scharrell. And
That's
part
right.
of this grieving that I was describing that I went through is that I recognized that in order to do that, I had to let some things go. When I
Yeah.
sat down and moved myself from the bottom of the list to the top of the list, I had to really sit with myself. And that meant I had to make those tough decisions around what wasn't working in my life, as
Right.
opposed to how it would look when I made that decision, right?
Yeah.
To terminate a relationship with someone who I loved and I trusted. And I expected to be that person that was going to finally reposition me in a way where I could experience love in a way that I thought I was going to be able to experience it. And then it was like, hell to the no, that's not going down.
Yeah.
An amazing man, a wonderful person. But what I recognize is that what I needed and what I wanted, he wasn't in a position to give.
Yeah.
And so I had to set that boundary to say, Scharrell, it's not fair to him or you for you to be in a place where you're not happy. Therefore, he's not happy. And to stay in that space, you got to set a boundary around that and make a
That's
decision.
right.
Right.
That's
And
right.
so now I'm dealing with the fact that I'm a mom of adult sons.
Right.
Right. So it's a complete shift.
That's
So I
right.
had to mourn the fact that my kids don't really not only need me the way they did,
Yes.
they don't want me in their space all the time.
That's
And
right.
so now I'm dealing with the loneliness and the grief of the mama bear trying to figure out what does she do.
Right.
So I'm dealing with
Yes.
that, coupled with the fact that now I'm single, coupled with the fact that I started this job and never really got a chance to meet anybody personally. So I don't really have the allies and camaraderie that I did at a firm where I was there 20 years. So
Yeah.
there's that loneliness that comes into play.
Yes.
And so really having to sit down and say, all right, Scharrell, in spite of all of that, what do you want?
Yes.
What do you want? And
That's
how do
right.
you consider Scharrell? And so I'm learning how to do that every day through the
Yeah.
tools that you've shared, and
Yeah.
being able to start to set some boundaries. But it is tough. When you say,
It is tough. Well, it's also because that's been your identity for so long, right? Like
right,
whenever you make an identity shift, there's going to be some grief. And I think I want to say it's the grief recovery method, but they have a
mhm,
definition of the word grief. And we usually think it's like for death or, a divorce or something that we deem worthy of grieving, but they
mhm,
define it as any change in a pattern or behavior. So that
right,
means even good things. Like for me, when we moved from Southern California all the way across the country to North Carolina, it was the best decision we've ever made, but I had to grieve the hell out of it. Right? There
I know
was
I
an
had to grieve when you moved too.
there was an ending, right? There was a
Right,
change in a pattern or behavior. And so even if the word grief doesn't resonate with you, it is an emotional processing that needs to happen whenever there is change, good change or bad change. And again, that's part of that emotional intelligence that we tell ourselves don't feel it. But to this question, I think it really needs to come down to what are those priorities? What do you want? Like you
right,
said. And I think also disproportionately for women, we don't think about that all the time. We
we
think
don't.
about what is everyone else going to think? What's my family going to say? We don't think about our own fulfillment. And let me tell you, I've had to sever some relationships in my family because it came down to, do I either make you happy or do I make me? And when push comes to shove, I'm choosing me.
Right.
I'm
And,
choosing
and
me.
and the world will make you feel bad about that. The world would tell you, well, how could you be so selfish?
Yeah.
How could you, be so inconsiderate? And we believe that, as you talked about. So it's important that we recognize that making those conscious decisions for you so that you can be your best self is really part of that journey to experience life at its fullest. And I would even say for those of you who are sheltering in place, and I'm gonna first speak to those who are sheltering in place with small children
Mm,
and relationships, that it is important that you carve out time for yourself, even
yes.
in your own space.
Mhm.
I raised my sons by myself. My marriage ended when my youngest son was 2, and he's 21 now, and I have 3 sons. Everyone knows. So for 17 years, I was a single mom and raising my kids and navigating them up through my eldest graduating, and now he's married and things of that nature. But the point of the matter is, even then, I had to teach my sons that mommy needs some me time.
Yes.
Mommy needs some time for her to make sure that when I show up my best. And so my children had to learn very early that in order for them to get the best of me, I needed to make sure that I was at my best. When I came off of a job that was hard and stressful, I was tired or sad or disappointed, whatever that was, it wasn't fair for me to then bring that to them. But it was important that they understood that I needed time to get back to myself. So they would say, okay, mommy. And it's interesting because I didn't realize my mother did that to my brother and I when we were growing up. My mother used to meditate, and I'm sure she still does. And, she'd come in or we'd come in and she'd say, I have to meditate. And we knew, don't bother her. She needs to meditate. And then 20 minutes later, she'd come out and, I can't even remember a time when I saw my mom, unbalanced or any of that, but the point I'm trying to make is that sheltering in place with your family doesn't mean that you no longer should take care of yourself.
That's right.
We have got to take care of ourselves. Make an appointment and have the masseuse come to the house and wear a mask.
Yep.
Make an appointment and get your nails done or your feet done and wear a mask. Take that time out to run a bath and put some bubbles in there and close the door and light some candles and get a glass of wine and a good book.
That's right.
I'm good for that. But the point I'm trying to make is that it is so important that we take care of ourselves. Someone was asking in the chat, and I'm going to ask again, please bring your questions to the Q&A. But how do we move away from the judgment of others? When we're in a space now, and I know that there's so many people that get into these debates on social media and expressing their feelings. I'm not really one for all of that, but there's a lot of judgment around other people and their positions, especially around politics and Black Lives Matter. And personally, it's just so much divide. And, I'll speak to that in a moment. But I think in terms of our personal responsibility of moving away from judging others, do you have any tips that you could give people about moving away from judgment and moving more to our unification?
Yes, I do. Gosh, I could go on this one for a long time. First of all, I think that usually whenever we are judging somebody else, there's some element of fear. There's either they're going to take something away from me. And I think that's really similar no matter what side of the aisle you're on. There's some sort of fear that is at the root of that. And it's not always valid, right? Sometimes it's hyperbole. Sometimes it's media infused. So with regards to how do you let go of the judgment of others or what other people think, I operate under a mantra that I've coined that is, you are responsible for your intention, not your reception. And the idea behind that is you are responsible for how you show up.
Right.
You are responsible for how you behave. You are responsible for your tone of voice. You are responsible for your body language. You are not responsible for how it is received. So there has, like, for example, I respect everybody's religious beliefs. I identify as agnostic. My mom definitely does not. And so we have a sort of a challenging relationship because of that. So I will tell her, I fully support whatever it is that you want to do or you want to believe, but I would request that you don't do X, Y, or Z with me, or that you don't ask X, Y, or Z of me. I find that offensive. I hope we can have some mutual respect here. And I deliver it in that way. Now, the way she receives that is not my responsibility. And so I think that also has something to do with our emotional intelligence, because a lot of times when that other person is unhappy with whatever it is that we're saying, we can't be with that uncomfortable emotion, especially if you tend towards people pleasing. You go, oh my gosh, I just want to smooth it over. I just want everybody to be okay. But then we have this opposite situation that's happening, I think, disproportionately on social media, because most of the, I have plenty of friends who have voted in different ways than I have, and we can have very thoughtful, considerate conversations. It's when people are keyboard commandos behind
Come on now, girlfriend.
behind their computer. And we know this is, again, another NLP thing, that it's like 5 or 7%, something around there, is the amount of what our words actually mean.
Right.
A majority is from our body language and our inflection of voice, which we don't have when we're keyboard commandos. So when you go in there, not only do you not have to deal with somebody else's response to you, but you're also not able to accurately express yourself. So to me, it's a futile battle. I will talk to people all damn day in real life because I think we can be so much more civil with one another.
Right.
I think a majority of people can be, but we're also stressed out and freaked out and scared and fearful. So we take it out somewhere. So my rule is like, I don't deal with social media stuff because I want to affect change. And I don't feel like that is ever a successful way to affect change. But as far as the judgment thing, start thinking about, if somebody is upset with me, if somebody thinks that I did something wrong, am I proud of my own behavior?
Right.
Am I okay with how I showed up? Not, do I need to twist and contort to make them happy? But no. Let's start having this as the barometer. Could I have said something differently? Maybe I need to go clean that up. Maybe I need to apologize for my tone. I've done that before plenty of times. You are responsible for your intention. You are responsible for how you show up, not your reception. You can't control it.
I think that's perfect. And, like you, I'm constantly asking, well, if someone didn't receive something the way that I thought that they should have, or I would have liked for them, I will ask, well, how could I have said that differently?
Right.
What did I say that triggered the emotion? And what I found is that oftentimes the party can't articulate it because it's their own internal emotion. If you ask me, do I like that dress? And I say, no, I don't like that dress. Or if I walk in the room and say, wow, Amy, I don't like that dress, you're going to feel the exact same way. You know? So at the end of the day, I think that we do really need to be able to sit with ourselves and understand how we react to things and why we react that way, and stop placing the responsibility on somebody else as it relates to how we actually feel. And at the same token, we can't take responsibility, to your point, of how other people feel if there isn't the need to shift, to your point. Yes, take responsibility for how you say it, your body language, and what you're saying. But if someone feels a certain way simply because you didn't say what they wanted you to say, you are not responsible for that. And that's a huge part of being authentic and setting boundaries, because so often we avoid saying what needs to be said because we don't want to deal with how people feel. And we've got to learn how to have authentic, honest conversations with grace, knowing that if we do that in a thoughtful way, then how people feel is not your responsibility. It's just not.
You have no control over it.
People have a hard time with that, and not only that, when you shift to authenticity, I know I've been called, well, you're just so direct, well, what do you want me to be, manipulative and underhanded? I mean, it's like,
that's right.
People expect that. They expect you to lie, manipulate, tell the truth. And then when you actually tell the truth, people are like, well, I just can't believe you said that. Well, you asked me, did
Don't ask. I know. That's how I feel. I have a colleague, her name is Brooke Castillo, and she always says people pleasers are effing liars, and obviously she's more verbose with that, but it's so true. We think that sugarcoating everything, you're being a liar is what you're being. You're being inauthentic. And I would be willing to bet that most people say, I want people in my life who are authentic, who can tell me how it is, who can support me. I don't want somebody who's just, blows smoke up my ass. I want those types of people in my life. So are you being the type of person that you want to attract?
Exactly.
Whether it's in a friendship or a relationship.
That's there. And that's it. That's key right there, what you said. Are you
be the person that you want to attract? Because we buy into this idea that putting everyone else's thoughts, opinions, and needs is somehow incredibly important. And I think it's poison disguised as nobility.
Mm-hmm.
We think it's so noble to lay ourselves down, but it's poisonous. And we're not attracting the people that we want in our life because we're attracting takers, because we're saying,
Mm-hmm.
I'm willing to be that.
Right. Right.
You know, and then if we're consistently placing everybody else in front of ourselves, that sends a subconscious message to our mind that we don't matter as much. Better
Right.
stay silent. Their emotions matter more. So when I tell people to start speaking up or advocating or boundaries or tough conversations, it's not for the hell of it. It sure as hell isn't fun. But we do that because we need to bolster in that belief that we actually matter, that how I feel matters, that I am worthy and I'm deserving of happiness, and that deserves a voice.
And it does. And you know, that means that sometimes when you find yourself in a space with people who are treating you like you don't matter, you got to pivot.
That's right.
Got to make a decision, because you can't say that you matter and then let people treat you like you don't.
That's
and
right.
what you will find is those individuals who really care about you, they'll shift. They will. They won't make excuses for bad behavior. They won't delay in the shift because you matter.
That's right.
I really like what you said also about people who lie to you, because at the end of the day, that's what it is.
Yes.
That which is not true is a lie. You know, so at the end of the day, if you want people in your life that's going to fill your cup, you've got to allow people in your life that's going to tell you the truth. It's really, really important that you have people in your life that tell you the truth about yourself for the betterment of yourself, not to make you feel bad, not to embarrass you, not to make you look bad, but to help you be the better you. Look, we're talking about leaving the past behind and having a leadership journey that's going to yield you a high return. And I recognize that this conversation is full of so much that you probably have been feeling like you've been hit with, you know, drinking out of a water hose. But the bottom line is this. Look, everybody has bad experiences in their life, and 2020 has been a hell of a year. It's been horrible for so many. And whether or not we've elevated in some areas, we have not been able to celebrate even our successes in a way in which we could. And then for those of us who have experienced significant loss, you know, literal loss due to death, loss of employment, economic shift. Those of you who are sheltered in place at home, you're having a quarantine, you're balancing family and relationship, or you at home alone, you wish you were in a relationship, dealing with sickness, people have contracted the virus, other things, cancers, all sorts of illness that you can't even receive treatment or really be nurtured the way that you would want to be because of sheltering in place. The year is hard, but the bottom line is we all have had some bad experiences, but we have got to let things go and fully immerse into the new opportunities that you can create for yourself. The things that we're sharing with you are things that we hope that you will be willing to do. You know, it takes a lot of work to change. And what I want to pivot to in these next 2 minutes is just, how do you stay intentional about leaving the past behind? Yeah. So Amy, if you could give our listeners some steps. Now, remember this. I hope that you guys, we're going to do our best to end on time. And before 8:30, I'm going to roll a clip of the workshop that Amy is offering. Those of you who have participated in LIH this year, you're going to get an email from me about some coaching opportunities and an opportunity to stay connected. You can always email me at Scharrell@ScharrellJackson.com. But we're going to do our best to really leave you with some tangible tips to leave the past behind. So I'm going to let Amy kind of just narrow down some specific words and things you can do. I'll narrow it down, and then stay tuned for the end for me to air her workshop. And then please, please, please respond to the survey. We know that you're in email hell, but we're going to send out things from Leadership in Heels. Respond to our survey. Let us know how we're doing. 2021 is going to be a badass year in terms of our conferences, but let's leave you with some tangible tips on how to leave the past behind you and create the leadership journey that you truly want. Amy?
Well, I think one of the things that we've danced around a lot is giving yourself the opportunity to process, because what we don't want to do is mask over what it is that you've experienced. So I would say figure out a process where you can address the things that are happening. If you are severely affected financially, start looking at, can I talk to somebody, talk to a therapist about this? There's a lot of amazing opportunities to get help from all sorts of different people. You know, BetterHelp is a great connection. If you are dealing with isolation, reach out to somebody. So start looking at, what are the things that I actually need to heal so that I can move on. And then I think it's really important that we start heightening this emotional intelligence, like I've talked about, like using the knack tool: notice, ask, and choose. And I also think it's really important to, like we talked about, identifying what your priorities are going forward. So how can I start identifying, these are the things that I want to focus on as I continue moving on? The other important thing that you were just talking about a second ago is focusing on what is going well. We're so inundated with how things have been so awful that it's easy for us to just keep
Mhm.
telling that story. So start
Right.
looking at, like for me, I've connected with some friends that I haven't connected with in years. This particular year, I got a new dog this year. That was really exciting. There's a bunch of new things that have happened or that have been really amazing that we overlook. And there's also some really great websites and YouTube channels and social media places that you can find inspiring stories, people who are doing good work, things
Right.
that are awesome, right? Like Girls Inc., like Leadership in Heels. But we're so focused on all the negatives. So start looking at, how can I infuse myself with positivity, and then start creating a plan based off of what's a priority for you.
Yeah, that's excellent. And I want to say there was a question that came through. You know, Amy gave you some real tangible things that you can do and that you can ask yourself. And specifically, you have to make a decision. You
Yeah,
got to make a decision that you want to leave the past behind. You got to make a decision that you want to exercise the power of no. You got to make a decision that you want to have some self care and set aside self time for yourself and set some boundaries. You've got to make a decision to be open and honest and share with people what you need and what you want. And keep in mind, just because it's sometimes hurt doesn't mean that you're being hurtful. People
right.
label you in a negative way because somebody got hurt. Being honest, being authentic, being direct does not mean you're not kind and you're not considerate.
That's right.
It just means that you're honest and direct. To be unkind and inconsiderate would be to say something mean or in a mean way. But just because you tell somebody the truth doesn't mean that you're not kind. Shift your thinking of labeling people who have the courage to be honest as people who are not kind. I'm a very open and honest person, and I'm an exceptionally kind person. It actually hurts my feelings when people say, oh, well, that you're just so direct, as if that's to say it's a bad thing. I'm
You
also
just got to
so
go,
kind.
thank
I'm so
you.
compassionate. I'm loving. I'm
Yeah,
considerate. So we've got to change the way that we think. And we've got to make sure that we have a routine. We start our day off with self love, with being able to speak positive to ourselves. We've got to navigate and write down what we want, celebrate our wins. That is so important that you celebrate your wins and make sure you have a tribe of people around you that are building you up. Do not isolate. Bring somebody into your space that can navigate you through and usher you to the finish line, and then give them permission to tell you the truth about yourself. But whatever you do, decide to leave the past behind you so that you can create the leadership journey leading your life exactly the way you want it. And when you make a mistake, give yourself some grace, give yourself some mercy, pivot, celebrate your wins, and start over. Amy E. Smith, girlfriend, you are amazing. I
thank
love
you.
you. I'm grateful for your presence on this Leadership Heals event this morning. For those of you who submitted questions and we were not able to answer them, I promise you we will on social media. Amy, I am so grateful for your presence. I'm thankful that you were able to contribute this morning, and I want you to have an outstanding day. Thanks again.
Thank you so much. And I'm hoping I can just leave a quick,
Absolutely.
hey, here's where to find me. If you would like to hear more rants, I do this every single week on my podcast. My husband is my sidekick and we have a blast. But if you're interested in learning more, please go to thejoyjunkie.com. I believe it's going to be coming out in your email as well. And there's tons of free stuff. We're going to air a little commercial about my workshop that's available for everybody who's hanging out. But I would really encourage you, no matter what you do, please decide on one actionable steps so that this isn't just a good idea, that you just listen to a bunch of good ideas. Get into action and come get a bunch of free shit over at thejoyjunkie.com. I'd be honored to hang out. Thanks so much, Scharrell.